people, welcome back to another Writing Tip Tuesday. I'm Sammy, and I'm a writer who likes to help other writers become better writers. This week, I am continuing my mini-series on what I love about different writing forms. This week is going to be part 3, the final part, at least for now, of the writing formats that I use, and I'm going to be talking about narrative writing. And I would just like to put out the disclaimer that these are all just things that I find enjoyable about these different formats. So let's start with the background of where I got into narrative writing. And unsurprisingly, I bet it's very similar to most people's history of getting into narrative writing. I was a big reader as a kid. I read like a lot, all the time, very, very often. I was that kid that would spend summer camp games reading on the sidelines rather than playing, and I had a different book like every 2 days. Naturally, the progression from like reading stories all the time became like, how do I process things that are happening to me that I don't know how to process? I'll write a story about somebody having a better time. So like in 3rd grade, I went from one school to a new school in a totally different area, had no friends there. So I was like very nervous about it in the summer going into it. So I wrote a basically fan fiction of my life where instead of having to change schools to go to public school, my dad won the lottery and then we had like this crazy amount of money and I had to change schools from going from public school to like a fancier school and having to deal with that. And I decided I was gonna write this book. It was really just like a way of processing my fears and like putting them on the sidelines to a more fun experience, which never obviously got finished. I never finished writing it, but I still have that notebook somewhere where it's just got like the beginning of this like story where we move into this super big mansion in this really rich area, and then I have to like make new friends because the character was just me going through something very similar to what actually was happening in my life. So I have a lot of those like spiral bound notebooks that are just the start of books of things that I wanted my life to look like but never actually did. And then once I processed whatever I was going through writing that story, I would just stop writing the story. I have a lot of just started books that I wrote throughout my childhood that are just in spiral bound notebooks. And I can't use the rest of this notebook because it's for this book. And what if I want to come back and write more of this book? You can definitely see the progression of my handwriting through this, so that's fun. But that's generally where the concept of narrative writing started for me. And then I went to college and I found the other formats of writing that I've already talked about, screenwriting and playwriting, which are a lot less work than narrative writing. So I kind of poured more of myself into those, but I do still very much so love narrative writing. I need to strengthen it for sure. And that's a lot of what I'm doing here, is learning things to strengthen my narrative writing formats. So let's get into the things that I love about narrative writing. For one, it's the most accessible form of writing. It's a lot easier to learn how to write narrative storytelling formats. I'm talking like books, short stories, like the kind of thing that most people read. Fiction storytelling that is meant and destined to exclusively live on the page. It's really easy to access. For one, there's not like a ridiculous amount of rules that you need to learn. There's not a whole new like shorthand language that you have to learn. There's not a totally different experiential way of telling the story that like screenwriting and playwriting have, respectively. So you can pretty much pick up a book off the shelf and learn something about writing in that format. And there's all of these other writers who have written about their writing process and like how they get things done and like all of that kind of stuff. I have a whole bunch of books on writing. I have books on screenwriting because those are very structured and very like stiff and ruled, all of that. And then I have books on the actual just general process of storytelling and becoming a writer and the writer's journey and stuff like that. You can learn so easily because there's so many different ways of getting resources. Mainly that you can read any book that you enjoy and learn something from it, which is a huge platform of what I do here on this channel with my Story Study Saturdays, is just reading and learning about writing through reading. Also, with it being the most accessible of all of the writing formats, nobody's gonna be like, why are you writing a book? What's the point of writing? Like, how do you even get that out into the world? Nobody's gonna do that like they will with like a screenplay or a regular play script. Like, people don't know what the process is behind that. In fact, like I write those and I don't fully know what the process is behind getting those out there. So people will see that you're writing a book or writing a short story and they'll be like, oh, you should totally publish it through, you should try and submit it to these people. You should submit it to this lit magazine. You should do this, you should do that. I know somebody who can get you reviews. Like, it's not necessarily necessarily questioning so much as people are bound to be more supportive because it's accessible. People have books in their homes. Most people have at least one book in their home. So it's not something that's super different from other people that there's gonna be a line of questioning behind it. Another reason is that it's really easy to find people to give you critique. If you watched my screenwriting video, you know that I wanted people to read my screenplay and I had to send them instructions on how to read the script because of the formatting. And you don't have to do that with narrative writing. If the person you were sending your story to can read the language that you wrote your story in, you don't have to give them instructions on how to read your story. It's way easier to get people to take the time to read it because it's not going to be super effort filled. But that at the same time could be a negative depending on the kind of person that you get to read your work. There are some people who are just not the best at giving critiques and not the best at receiving critiques. You can learn more about that in my types of people getting critiques video. But like, there's a wider pool of people to pull from. You don't have to talk to people who are gonna belittle you because they've been in the film business for so much longer, or like they don't understand why you would write a play about this instead of just writing a book or whatever. You just have more access to more people. And there are people out there who are literally like, hey, I'll read your book if you want me to. I like reading. There are people who do that just because they can. There's a lot more opportunities to grow and get that expanse that comes from taking critique effectively. It's also the most immersive format of writing that I participate in. Everything that the reader needs to understand is on the page while they're reading. Everything that they need to know, they can get from your words and your words alone, which is both a lot of pressure and kind of refreshing because like screenwriting, you can't tell the camera what to do, and playwriting, you don't really know how the actor is going to take a certain stage direction or how they're going to interpret a line, what the meaning is behind that line. So there's a lot of things that are just out of your control. But when you're doing narrative writing, you can pretty much direct the story exactly how you want it to go. You can't direct how the reader is going to perceive it, but everything that you have control over, you absolutely have control over. And even when there is a feeling that you've done the most that you can to make this picture like as crystal clear as you can imagine it, if somebody takes your book and turns it into a movie, there are going to be people who think they got that image wrong. It's entirely subjective at the same time while being objective of what you put on the page, you know? Another thing that makes narrative storytelling enjoyable is that there's so many options for how you want to tell your story. Formatting, tense, past tense, present tense, first person, third person, second person, third person limited, third person omniscient. Like you've got so many options for how to tell your story that no matter what you choose, it's gonna be right for your story. It doesn't have that like required screenwriting has to be done in present tense. Narrative writing is also not just the most accessible to learn and to get feedback on. It's also the most accessible to get out into the world. There are so many platforms and methods and types of publishing and different places you can publish through or different ways that you can publish. You could do a serial chapter by chapter publishing. You can publish a book. You can unpublish a book, then republish a book. You can self-publish a book. You can traditionally publish a book. You can submit your short story to a magazine or papers, online publishing like Medium. You can submit your writing out into the world in so many different ways that playwriting and screenwriting just don't have the opportunity for because they are destined to be something else besides just the written word. And that's awesome. For getting the opportunity to get your feet wet in the world of like getting feedback on things and actually having fans, I guess, or readers, like people who consistently want to look for what you're doing. Narrative writing is pretty much the only fiction writing format that I do that gets that opportunity. I'm sure poetry also has like a similar aspect to it, but I don't write poetry. Even though I wish that I could, it's not for me. Between narrative writing, screenwriting, and playwriting, I could write a short story and publish it on a blog right now. And people could find that blog and read it. And it's out there. I could write a short story right now and publish it on Medium. I could write a short story right now and send it to a magazine and they could read it and reject it or read it and publish it. And then people could read it. There's so many options for getting your writing out there that you can actually make a name for yourself faster in that way. Like you can write a book and publish it on Wattpad and then get a publishing deal because your Wattpad book did a good job on Wattpad, and then a publisher is like, hey, you should publish this book traditionally, and then you get to publish a book that you wrote that you published on Wattpad and make legitimate publishing money off of your Wattpad book. I don't know if Wattpad can make you money, but it's an option and it's out there and people have done it. I can't even tell you how many books that I've read that I find out after I finished reading it in book format or Kindle format, whatever you consider book format, like physically a published book that's purchasable that was written for Wattpad originally. And then you find out and you're like, huh, maybe I should check out Wattpad, but there's so many other books out there that I'm just like, no, not right now. But it's an option, and there's so many. There's so many options, and you don't even really need funding to get those options taken care of. You just need to write and to put out something you're proud of. And that's amazing. And it puts you in a place where you can get feedback on your writing and see if this is for you. Not necessarily like you should give up, but like if you are capable, qualified, and interested in putting your work out there for other people to read. I also believe that books and stories have a longer legacy than a screenplay or a stage play would, because a book is going to last constantly in its present moment. A screenplay is only going to be as good as the movie that it makes. Nobody's going to remake a screenplay into another movie. And a play is only as applicable as it is to the present moment that it's in. If you have a play that's just so out of date that there's no real reason to perform it anymore, nobody's going to perform it anymore. And then your play is just stuck and it's gone. It's no longer relevant. But a book will stay forever in its one moment, and a book will last longer than the author will most of the time. Some books will go like out of print or just like not be popular enough to keep up after an author is gone. But there are plenty of authors that we know that are long since dead or recently dead, and we know their work because their work was worth keeping. And if you write something that's worth keeping, even if it's no longer relevant within your own lifetime, people are still going to be reading it. And there's always the potential to have your writing become that long-lasting thing if you just keep working towards it. And if that's something that's important to you, narrative writing has that. But that is all that I've got for you today. This is the conclusion of my little mini series, at least for now, unless I pick up a new writing format or I want to revisit some of these things. For now, this is the end. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you are a narrative style writer, which I anticipate many people in my audience that regularly watch these videos would be, tell me about the first story that you ever remember writing and why you wrote it. I think that would be super interesting. I know that the first story I can remember writing was the one when I was changing schools, but I'm sure I wrote stuff before that I just don't like cognitively have locked in, and they're probably in like a composition notebook that I threw away years ago because I couldn't read my handwriting. I think that would be a fun little way to like check in. Hey, what do you love about narrative writing? How long have you loved narrative writing? And have that little chat. But that is it for today. So if you don't want to miss any of my uploads, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell next to it. I'm here every Tuesday and Saturday for Story Study Saturdays and Writing Tip Tuesdays. So I will see you guys back here on Saturday.